Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
And welcome to the show. My name is Charles Smith, and we are here with Randy Swaim. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a great show because I have a sports background, and Randy Swaim is an executive coach. Founded his own company called Coaching for Relevance. However, Randy was trained by one of the top executive coaches in the world, Marshall Goldsmith. He's a certified Marshall Goldsmith executive coach. Randy, welcome to the show.
I'll tell you what, it's an honor to be here. I'm glad to be here today.
Well, we're glad to have you. And you know, Randy, when people become experts or one of the best at what they do, we always want to know, how did he get to where he got to, or how did she get to where she got to? And we want to know that. We want to dig into your journey a little bit right off the start.
Okay.
So on a broad question, tell us, how did you get your start?
Well, I tell you, it really kind of focuses on leadership. I know I come from a little bit of a dysfunctional background, and so there's been a lot of struggles and overcoming in my journey. But what was amazing is, and most of my background prior to getting to this point was in the military and flying jets. I jokingly say when I got out of college that I bored every romantic relationship I had early on, because I only had two goals in my life. I wanted to fly Lear jets and I wanted to fly an F-4 Phantom kind of thing. And but I got a chance to be a crew in both of those and get a lot of flight time. But in the process of all of that, not only do I truly sense that I've lived my dream, but during the time, and a lot of that was during the military, I got a chance to serve with some of the most incredible leaders. And one of the people that I learned the most from about leadership was General Richard B. Myers. And he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff between 2001 and 2005, but he was also my squadron commander. When I was in a squadron back in 1981 to 85, back in that time period, then he and I flew together a bunch. But I tell you what, I tell people that I didn't learn anything from what he told me. What I learned was in observing how he interacted with people and how he led people. I gained a lot of insight from that. And I didn't even realize how much I had been sort of applying that in my own life, as far as the professional life of coming forward. And there were several examples as I went forward where I applied that in ways that sort of were kind of amazing. And that's what really drew me to a leadership perspective. And one of the struggles in my journey was bringing that leadership over to my personal life as well, because I didn't do that as well. But on the professional side, it was really built in me quite well. And in fact, I'll just give you one if you would like, I'll just give you one quick story. This happened about a year and a half before I started my own company. But there was a young man that was just about to graduate from college. And his parents said that he wanted to go into the military and fly, into the Marines and fly. And so they asked, knowing my background, they asked if I would get with him. And I said, sure. And so we got together, we went to a restaurant and had dinner. I talked about, being an officer and being in a squadron and, all that, kind of oneness and synergy and leadership and all that kind of stuff. Just sort of talking about that. And we spent about an hour and a half together. And it was kind of interesting because when he was basically sitting right out on my front porch and he was getting ready to go. And one of the things that I did is I said, but there's one other thing you want to keep in mind. And this is a good leadership perspective. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, take a look at your phone and tell me what the date and time is right now. And he did. And he told me the date and time. And I said, count on it. 3 to 4 years from right now, if you choose to do this, 3 to 4 years from right now, you may be flying your F-18 in bad guy territory and a surface to air missile is coming up to shoot you down. And as you're looking at it, you move the airplane, but you see the missile adapting. And maybe you have a sense that it's coming right for your cockpit. I said, what you have to understand is that you have to know in whatever you're going to be working in, whatever area, you have to know that you can live the last 30 seconds of your life, whenever that is, now or 50 years from now. You have to know you can live the last 30 seconds of your life with no apologies and no regrets. And he went,
Mm,
whoa, whoa. And I said, now, mark my word, this isn't about the military. I said, if you want to go work at McDonald's or in some other field, that question is still important for you. And there's no
right.
right or wrong answer to it. And nobody else can answer that question for you. And it
That
was,
is
amazing. And his parents came up to me about 3 days later, and they were applauding me for how they'd never thought about that kind of an approach, but it's a leadership and coaching approach. And his father looked at me, said, you should be doing this full time, kind of thing. And that's what got me. That was kind of probably one of the first times where I really got a sense of the leadership, how that had been developed in me over the last 30 years, and
sure.
what that was all doing and everything. And so that's what and I realized that was my passion. And so it's just one story about how that came to be. But, just with the people that I served with and the people, folks that I observed, and I observed the benefits of how they connected. And on my YouTube, it's got a number of little stories that relate to how I applied what I learned from them and everything. And but it was amazing. And it really helped me get a sense of, what, that's my passion. And I
Hmm.
actually, I actually was for 2 years. I was in one of the top 10 aerospace engineering uh, 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 universities in the country. They work with NASA on a day-to-day basis, and it was about that time. Now, this was back around 1986, 87, right back in that time period. So about 40 years ago, or 35 to 40 years ago, and I stepped away from it, not because I hated it, but because it was that point where I was really beginning to have a sense that this team development, this team potential, people's success, leadership, developing your team, all those kind of things was really what my passion was all about. And I used the next probably 15 years really kind of looking at and applying and observing all of that. So
Right.
it's just a big thing of how that happened with me.
Yeah, let's talk about let's take a little deeper dive into that. You
Sure.
mentioned you mentioned overcoming some obstacles and adversity. People can read all the success stories that they want
Yep.
and pull really key information to help move their lives in a different direction that they want to go in. But I also think and know that when you read books about failure and adversity, as long as the stuff in your life you learn from it, I say it's written in pencil, it's erasable when you learn from it because that's when you
That's true.
delete it. So you got to learn from it. So can you talk about, give us an example of a adverse time or something you had to overcome, what it was and how you learned from it, and that's a part of your toolbox today.
I'll share that. I'll share it with you, and it's really part of my personal life. I tell people that I've gone through basically four um, key points, four defining moments in my life, and this actually sort of leads to my fourth defining moment. But I will tell you that I kind of the clan of the family that I was born into was actually a good clan, but my immediate family and parents had real struggle points, and I'm not looking to badmouth them per se or
Sure.
anything like that, but they just um, my dad divorced, went on, and just the way they interacted and all that. What I did is I grew up from that part of my life fully believing that this aspect of romantic possibilities was non-existent, couldn't be, all this sort of stuff. I mean, and it was a real struggle point at the time to think that, well, why even care about your personal life? Who gives a rip, kind of thing. And
Yep.
I've done some things right, but I've also made some mistakes along the way. No two ways about it. Like we all have. Let's face it,
Yep.
kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I've done some things right. But what I will say is, on the first marriage that I had, and it was a little bit of a struggle point because everything prior to that, kind of thing with my parents and all that kind of stuff, just made you think that, it's not even possible, kind of thing. And and uh, and the problem with it is that there came a thing, and I don't want to bring a lot of religion into it, but from a sort of a religious aspect of it, she and her family were control freaks in a church that they were in and everything, and it really got sort of goofy in the way it was happening. We didn't even make it to the first year, and
Mm.
and what it did is it just, there was a thing where, in fact, it dealt like there was a fellow friend of mine, and and actually he's the guy that I gave him the oath of commissioning when he joined the military, and he retired from the Air Force, and all that kind of stuff. But uh, uh, we were talking one day, and he talked about sort of evolution, but in bringing a sort of a spiritual aspect to it. I said, well, it you know people do evolve. You look at basketball players today, and they're taller than they used to be, and all this sort of stuff. but
Sure.
but I
Sure.
said, this the struggle point is no human ever became an ape in their life or whatever, or vice versa, kind of thing. And I said, so that's the kind of the one challenge point on it. And he looked at me, he said, you know what, Randy, thank you for sharing that. He said, I hadn't thought about it that way, but thank you. I said, there's a lot about evolving within a person's life where
Sure.
that does happen. I did, we all do some point. And I said, but that's where that theory sort of shifts, because it never really crosses spatial lines. Well, he was very appreciative of just our scientific discussion, but
Hmm.
the lady that was my wife at the time had been there, and she vindictively attacked me for about 3 or 4 days after that, because she just, she was used to people that are just control freaks and all of this sort of stuff. And um and it just crushed me. And so I went to some, I never got with another lady outside of her or anything like that. But uh there was some challenges with it, of believing it, and things I should have done much better, and all that kind of stuff. But I was really feeling completely, why is life even here? Kind of thing. I mean, I never had a tendency to take my own life or anything, but there was that sort of sense of it. And her, father basically called my family members who were about 3 states away. They tried to badmouth me to every person they could come up with, and yet everybody who knew me and everybody that was aware of it was aware of kind of what had
Hmm.
happened and all that kind of stuff. And so they were sort of ticked off that it didn't go where they wanted to. And she ended up, she didn't really have um any evidence for getting a divorce and getting anything out of me, so she got an annulment. And I said,
Mm.
okay, I'm not going to force you, and kind of thing. And but after that happened, it was just like, geez, why even try? Why even try? And and that was a struggle point for me for probably about, I would go out and say, probably for about 15 years after that,
Mm.
of struggling with that. And but I will say this, that from a standpoint here, um, I I did get married again, but there was some struggles. I was her fifth marriage, and so there was some challenges there. But and there were things I could have done better, and much more right, and things of that nature. But uh, she actually got panic stricken because she had a great granddaughter who was stillborn, and it just,
Mm.
they could hear the heartbeat on the day. And and she was when she was born, she was stillborn,
Right.
and that collapsed my wife's feelings, and her whole mind and personality went across to, I just want to go take care of my family. So she got a divorce. There was nothing that came from me that she took. There was nothing that I kind of forced on her, but I kind of was sitting there, and there was a sense of, on the day I knew she was leaving, there was a sense of something was saying, just go back to that junk, 35, 40 years ago, because you know what, marriage is nothing and all this. And I stood there and I said, no, ain't doing that. And in my own mindset, in prayer, if you will, I sort of, I told God, kind of thing. I said, you know what, if I'm led in a different direction, a positive direction, okay, so be it. But if I'm not, I'm going to stay committed to her. And I was committed to her for basically 9 years after she left,
Mm.
and it blew away because in ways that I took care of her family. Her granddaughter, who was the mother of the stillborn baby, they actually moved in. She and her husband actually moved into my house and lived with me for 3 years. And
Mm.
toward the end of her life, I was donating money to a church and having the church send her a check because I knew she was tough. She was on food stamps and all this, and it's just it blew away. But at the very end of it, um, she was she was told that I had been doing that about 2 weeks before she took her final breath, and
Wow.
uh, and and her whole reaction was priceless. I kind of share this in my autobiography and all that, some of the details about it. But the bottom line is, when you're talking about leadership, all those struggle points, all those
Hmm.
kind of things that you could have done better, should have done better, you learn from, in addition to some of those things that you did learn better. And one of the things that I realized when I was standing there and I made that commitment that I was going to stay committed to her, I realized that I had all that leadership developed professionally, but
Uh-huh.
that's the fourth defining moment in my life where I realized that I needed to bring that more effectively into my personal life as well. And that's a day where I did that. And so
Yeah.
I told a friend, I said, if she, in her last 2 weeks of life, if she got a sense that there was one person out of 5 marriages, if there was one man that
Mm.
truly felt love for her and all that, and that just made her go, wow, you know what? So be it. That's cool. So it's those kind of things that has been part of the struggle. There's been a lot of others, but there's been that's sort of in my personal life. But going through those kind of challenges is what helped me to get a sense of, okay, I see how this happens, and you can sort of see it in others. And I'll tell you what, it really made me take that and apply the leadership that I had learned in my professional life, and actually realize that I needed to bring it over more to my personal life. And it's not leadership isn't about pointing fingers and telling people what to do.
Right.
It's about
Right.
how are you really connecting with them in such a way that they want to do this. And
Right.
that's a huge lesson that I have realized, and I've actually shared it on a couple of radio shows just as a as a
Hmm.
as a as a point. But
So
that's just a little picture of it.
yeah. So Randy, you also come from a military
Hmm.
background, and with leadership, obviously, y- most people in the military that last a while, they're all leaders in their own right.
Hmm.
Um, but also, when you look at the top leaders, respected leaders, they come from one of three backgrounds, or it could be an assortment of the three:
Yeah.
military, religion, or sports.
Hmm.
Now, with your military background,
Because all three of those require leadership. No two ways about it.
required discipline and leadership. That's correct.
Yeah.
So I want to bring discipline into this.
Okay.
How do you equate discipline? What are the parallels that you see in discipline and leadership when you're coaching? Do you coach discipline as well?
Well, I'll tell you what, there are times when you have to kind of, and this is an art form of coaching, that it's not intellectual, um, teaching, academic lesson to them, but it's asking them the right questions where they sort that out. And
Mm,
it's interesting because discipline is critical. And you know what? You don't get discipline with your people because you threaten them or control them or point fingers and dictate to them or whatever. What you do is you lead and model discipline, and you do it in such a way that they want to follow you. And it in here they want to follow you. And it's very interesting because it's critical when they're doing that. In fact, I'll just give you one little tiny story about the discipline, um, because we were sitting. I was the at this time. This was back around 1988, something like that, and I was the site manager and the contract representative for our 135 operation that flew Learjets as a strategic air defense training contractor for the Air Force. And um, and uh, and I was sitting there, and I'm the site manager, so I'm the boss. I'm in control, and yet I could tell, I could tell that the team there, we had just finished a meeting, and they were having a conversation, but in listening to where they were going, I said, you know what? This is going good. I see where this is going. And most people, most managers want to kind of get in and lead because they think that's my role. Well, discipline is saying, let's let them wander for a minute here, kind of thing. And there's some times where leader discipline has to get in and do it, but there's other times where you got to let them do it to develop their own discipline and to get a sense where they believe it. And they were going someplace, kind of interesting with their exploration of this. And one of the pilots went over to sit down, so he was going to make some notes on what they had thought about and everything. But halfway in his seat, he wasn't in his seat, but he froze, and he looked over at me like this. And all I did, instead of jumping in and trying to be the control leader, what I did is I looked at him and I winked at him and I nodded my head. And that's all I did. And he just smiled and he sat down and went, kind of thing. And, does it mean you just give all sorts of control to everybody else? No. But discipline means sometimes when your team is feeling beat down, you've got to come in and lead and lead the way with that. But there's other times, and leaders have to understand that, because sometimes it's discipline to not jump in when you want to, because it's not
mm,
all about you, it's about the team. And that's what
right.
I did. I looked at him and I just nodded my head and I winked, and he just smiled and sat down and drew out some notes, and he came over and gave them to me, kind of thing. And I said, we'll talk some more about it, kind of thing. But the discipline is, and I know in the military there's been times in the past in combat where, you know everybody feels beat down, and the commander had to get out in front and physically lead them,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And there's times where that's important, but there's also times when you got to go, let's help them build trust in themselves with this, let's let them
Sure.
go there. And that clarity is a key part of that sort of inner discipline within us.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
pretty interesting with that.
Yeah, and when you also talk about coaching, kind of taking you on a path here, the in corporate, I've seen this a lot, and I want to get your opinion on it.
Sure.
They use the term coaching, and some people have a different idea of what coaching is. However,
Yep.
when you're an executive coach on, say, a subordinate or a direct report,
Yep.
in corporate, I've seen this happen a lot. You're quote unquote coaching someone that is new in your department, but when you go on vacation, while you're on vacation, that person's calling you all the time. So you're not having a vacation because they're calling you all the time based on what you said earlier.
Yeah.
You don't want
Yeah.
them to create their own neural pathways of solutions.
And you
Tell
brought
me
some good you brought some good neuroscience aspect to that. Yes.
Yeah, so tell me the issue on coaching on how to best coach independency versus a codependent relationship.
And that, thank you for asking that, because that's a key question. And when you look across a lot of sort of seeming leadership aspects around, people want to call all the attention to them. And so,
Hmm.
but that's not leadership. Leadership, and what I tell people, I've got a concept that is called organizational maneuverability, which is trademarked for me out of Washington. And it takes pilot lessons and applies them to leading your team in a rapidly changing, unpredictable environment. And
Ah,
one of the things that I tell people is, it's not about telling them what to do or telling them what I want them to think. It's about asking them the right questions that um, that will really get them there. And one of the things about it is, one of the things that I tell people is, are you leading and developing them in such a way that they can perform with precise success, even if you're not there?
sure.
And it's huge. And in fact, I'll just give one example of this. Back when I was in the military, it was just before I was promoted to major, but I went to a training class at an Air Force base, and I was the only officer in the class, because everybody else was like a tech sergeant or a staff sergeant or whatever, but it was a technical training instructor development class. And
Mhm.
everybody appreciated and respected me being in there. In fact, a lot of times they looked at me and called me Cap, and I was okay with that, because I know they were doing it with a degree of respect and all this. And the instructor was a tech sergeant, but he came in one day and they had some scenario based things that they were going to have each person be involved with through that particular day. And the tech sergeant instructor looked at me and he said, "And sir, I want you to know I got one particularly picked out for you." Then I just nodded my head. I said, "Okay." And what it was it was a picture. They had one other person in the class who was a sergeant, and what the picture of this was that he um, uh, the guy was going to be a enlisted guy who just got approved to go to officer training, and because of that, he felt like he didn't need to do this anymore. And so I was going to be, you know, talking to him about that. And I said, "Okay." And I came in, and it was amazing, because this is different than most people realize. I came in and I sat down, we shook hands. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And this guy play acted it really well. Immediately he said, "Well, it's all good, but you know what, doggone it, I'm going to officers training now. And I don't know why I don't even know why I'm here." You just start playing that kind of game. And
Sure.
I listened to him. And when he was done talking, here's what I did is I said, and this is verbatim what I did is I said, "Well, let me ask you something." He said, "Okay." I said, "How important is it for a true leader to understand followership?" And he froze for a second.
Good question.
And then he looks at me like this, and but this is what a true coach and a true leader does. And he looked at me, he goes, "Well, I guess it's pretty important." And I went, "You mind if I tell you something that I think I just heard you say?" He said, "What?" I said, "Did you just tell me that you're in a perfect place right now to develop your leadership?" And he went, "Boy, I guess I am." And I said, "I
Mhm.
tell you what, give some thought to that this week. And we meet next week, we'll talk about it." Shook hands.
Wow.
And when I went back to my seat, the tech sergeant instructor walked up to the podium. He said, "Sir, wow." He said, "I got to tell you, thank you for showing me that." He said, "I never envisioned that possibility." And I said,
Sure.
"Well, it is." And there was one tech sergeant in the class that said, "Well, I would have told him about his, responsibilities and all this kind of stuff." And my answer to him was, I said, "Well, you know what? I know that's my ace in the boot, but this is a good picture about leadership and this kind of thing." I said,
Sure.
I said, "That's my ace in the boot if I need it. But if I can connect with him in such a way that he's better, his divisions are better, the Air Force is better, and I don't have to use that, it's good." And this instructor just looked at me again and said, "Boy, sir, thank you for showing me that." But again, when you're talking about this aspect of connecting with people and truly leading and coaching, it's not about telling them where to go. It's not about telling them why. It's about asking the right question that they, kind of formulate it. And what with the situation that you were talking about, if I'm making them dependent on me, they're going to be calling me all the time.
Got it.
Guess what?
Yeah.
That's not being a leader. A leader is making it so that they build to the point where they can be successful for your team, even when you're not there.
Got
And
it.
that's what you want. It's a key point.
Yeah. Well, Randy, I think we can go on and on and on. And I have so many questions I want to ask you, but our time is running out. I
Okay.
got to give one more question. This is a
Okay.
zinger. This is a
Okay.
zinger.
Okay.
So, who has the better chance of being successful based on executive coaching? Who has a better chance? A professional sports coach running a business, or a CEO executive running a sports franchise?
You want to know the funny answer to it?
What's that?
The funny answer is it depends. And the reason I say that is it could be either one, depending on what you're doing.
Correct. There's
Because
no wrong answer.
that's right. And it depends on the level of leadership and the ability of connecting that person has identified.
Hmm.
And that depending on how the sports coach learned and adapted and became who they are, to the extent of how they did that, and did they really develop the true leadership aspect of it, they could do wonders in a business.
Yeah.
Because they they do all that. And I shared this on a Zoom call, international Zoom call, yesterday. But I'll just share this with you, that the art form of what you're talking about is the academic aspect that is there. That's a central piece of that leadership and all that. That is critical for somebody to know. But how you apply it is a little bit of an art form, because every single person that you interact with, whether it's on a team or whether it's in a business, every person you lead, every person you're trying to develop is a little different. And how you truly connect with them, where you bring that realization to them in a
Hmm.
way that, oh man, yeah, and they become. That's it. So, I mean, there's, basically understanding the truth of that aspect of leadership, but also to the extent how well are they in that sort of artistic vision of how to do that. So, like I said, it sort of depends, but either could be good. You could have a team coach that could just make a company go, "Wow, how'd we
Yeah.
get here?" Well,
Yeah.
Bob did it, kind of thing, or the other way around, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you have
No,
somebody with a business that went to a team.
yeah, I just asked that question to many people because there is no wrong answer, but it gives a perspective of how the person thinks about it. Well,
Yep.
Randy, like I said, we can go on and on. This has been a
Okay.
fantastic show. Enjoyed speaking with you, your insights and your wisdom on executive coaching. Thanks for coming on and sharing with our audience today.
Sounds good. And I know it's my understanding we'll be on for one more show, and we'll look forward to that when we get it. And but it's been an honor to be with you and to talk about what we did and just connect with who you are. That's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy.
You bet.
We hope you enjoy this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.